Get off your knees and get out of my wedding. Clara looked up from the marble floor, champagne soaking through her $15 shoes, broken crystal pressing into her palms. Sir, I work this event. You work nothing. You broke $3,000 worth of crystal because you can't hold a tray. She kept her voice flat. I'll replace it. Replace it. He crouched down, his $4,000 tuxedo. Pristine, his voice dropping to something colder. Slower meant only for her. You are a stepping stone, he said. Covered in kitchen grease. She pressed one hand against her apron pocket, against the folder inside it. She didn't answer. 300 guests watching. Dead silence.
Unbelievable. He just humiliated the one woman who secretly holds his entire future. Keep watching.
Clara adjusted the tray. Her hands were raw, blistered, burned from 14 hours of prep work. She had wrapped 2 fingers in medical tape before the shift, and the tape was already soaking through damp and pink beneath the kitchen lights. She straightened her back. She lifted the tray. She walked. The service door swung open. The grand ballroom swallowed her whole. She had never seen anything like it. Crystal chandeliers hung in cascading tiers above the marble floor, each one blazing with cold white fire. The light bounced off every surface, relentless, blinding, and completely indifferent. The tables were dressed in imported white linen, each centerpiece a tower of ivory roses and trailing greenery that cost more than her monthly rent. The guests moved through the room in their tailored silks, in their pressed tuxedos, their voices low, their laughter careful, practiced and precise. Clara kept her eyes down. She focused on the floor. The marble was polished to a mirror finish, and she could see the distorted small reflection of herself moving through it. A woman in a cheap polyester uniform, a woman carrying a tray, a woman who did not belong. She had been instructed to serve the head table first. She moved toward it. Her non-slip work shoes, $15 from the discount rack, squeaked once against the marble, and a woman in a beaded gown turned to look. Clara did not look back. She kept walking. She was good at that. She had spent 4 years becoming very good at that. The head table gleamed. The bride sat at the center, luminous, draped in ivory silk that pooled around her chair like something poured. She was laughing at something the man beside her had said, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her diamond catching every chandelier in the room. Clara did not look at the ring. She already knew its weight. She had felt it leave her account. She reached the end of the table. She stopped. She steadied the tray against her palm. "Champagne, sir," she whispered. The groom turned around. The tray slipped. It did not fall slowly. There was no graceful cinematic arc. The tray left her fingers, and the crystal exploded across the marble in a single shattering instant. Champagne spread across the floor in a wide golden stain. The sound rang through the ballroom like a gunshot, sharp, violent, and final. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. The orchestra mid-phrase went silent. Clara stood in the wreckage. Her shoes were soaked. The champagne was already seeping through the cheap fabric cold against her burned skin. She could not move. She could not breathe. She stood there motionless, silent, completely hollow, staring at the face of the man she had kissed that morning, Mark. He was wearing a $4,000 Italian tuxedo. His hair was cut. His jaw was clean. He looked exactly like the man who had pressed his forehead against hers in their dim apartment kitchen at 6 in the morning and told her he loved her. He looked exactly like the man who had taken her savings account number and typed it into a transfer form and emptied every cent she had ever earned. He looked at her now with cold, flat eyes. Not recognition, not guilt. Something worse, annoyance. "Clean it up," he said. His voice carried. The ballroom was that silent. Clara did not move immediately. 1 second passed. 2. She was aware of 300 people watching her. She was aware of the bride's confused, perfectly shaped frown. She was aware of the orchestra watching from their raised platform. She was aware of Sarah, the head server, standing frozen at the ballroom doors with a full tray in her hands, her face stricken. Her eyes locked on Clara with an expression that said she understood everything and could do nothing. Mark's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, barely perceptible, just enough for her to catch the shift. "I said clean it up," he repeated. "On your knees, before someone slips." A murmur moved through the nearest guests. Somewhere near the back, a woman in a red dress whispered something behind her hand. The man beside her nodded and looked away. The bride reached for her water glass, delicate, uncertain, studying Clara with the careful blankness of someone who had been raised never to acknowledge a scene. Clara bent down. She did not reach for the standing cloth first. There was no standing cloth. She went to her knees on the cold marble and the spilled champagne, and she began gathering the broken crystal with her bare hands. Her work shoes were soaked through. The champagne was cold, then stinging, finding every raw crack in her burned skin and opening it further. She worked methodically, piece by piece, her fingers moving through the wreckage. The sound of each shard, sharp, precise, and humiliating, cracked against the marble as she placed them onto the tray. Mark did not move. He turned back to his bride. He said something quiet, and the bride laughed soft and uncertain, and he touched her hand. Clara did not look up. She kept her eyes on the floor, on the glass, on the small, distorted reflection of herself kneeling in the mess. Her chest was locked. Her throat was locked. Everything in her body was locked down and pressed flat, because she understood with a clarity that felt almost calm that she could not fall apart here. Not on this floor. Not in front of him. Not yet. Sarah appeared at the edge of her vision, moving fast, quiet, controlled. She crouched beside Clara without a word, cloth already in hand, and began helping without asking permission. Their eyes met once. Sarah's face said everything. Her mouth said nothing. Clara gathered the last shard. She placed it on the tray. She rose. The ballroom had resumed cautiously, conversation restarting in careful, low waves. The orchestra lifted their bows. The bride was already leaning toward a guest on her left, radiant, composed, fully restored. Mark had his arm around the back of her chair, and he was smiling, easy and generous and completely at home. He did not glance back. Clara carried the broken tray toward the service door. Her hands were shaking. The champagne had dried into a cold, sticky film across her knees. She pushed through the door into the narrow concrete hallway, and she stopped. She pressed her back against the wall. She breathed. She thought of the battered, grease-stained leather folder locked inside the catering station drawer, the one she had pressed into Sarah's hands before the shift, and said quietly, with a steadiness that surprised even her, "Guard this with your life. It is our only lifeline." Sarah had not asked what was inside. She had simply taken it, and she had held it, and it was still there. Clara looked at her hands. The medical tape had gone fully pink. One knuckle was bleeding thin and bright where a shard had caught it. She pressed her thumb against it hard. She did not cry. She calculated. Mark had kissed her forehead at 6 this morning. He had called her his whole world at 6:15. He had walked out the door at 6:30, and by the time she had arrived at this estate to set up her catering contract, he had already been standing at the altar with another woman's ring on the table between them. A ring she now understood with the precise, devastating clarity of a woman who had checked her bank balance at midnight and found $14.32 she had paid for. She straightened up. She retied her apron. She picked up the empty tray. She went back through the door. As Clara wiped the floor at his feet, Mark had no idea she was calculating exactly what his betrayal had cost. Clara did not go back to the ballroom immediately. She stood at the catering station, her soaked shoes leaving faint, damp prints on the concrete floor, and she stared at the industrial sink. The water was running. She did not remember turning it on. The steam rose in slow white coils, mixing with the heavy, wet smell of burning sugar from the dessert station where someone had left a caramel reduction on too high a flame. The smell wrapped around her thick, suffocating, and familiar. She had spent 4 years standing over heat like that, 4 years building something carefully, painfully, one catering contract at a time, one 16-hour shift at a time, one deposit at a time. She turned off the water. She dried her hands. She let herself remember. It had started small. It always started small. Mark had lost his job in March, 2 years into their relationship. He had come home quiet that evening, his jaw set, his pride already hardening into something she would not be allowed to touch. She had not pushed. She had simply moved her hand to his shoulder and said they would figure it out. He had nodded. He had kissed her temple. He had said she was the only thing that made sense to him. She had believed every word completely without reservation, the way a person believes in something they have built with their own hands. She started taking more contracts. The first extra shift was a corporate luncheon downtown. The second was a private birthday dinner in a penthouse on the east side. By summer, she was running 4 events a week, sometimes 5, arriving home after midnight, her feet cracked, her lower back, a solid column of pain. The apartment always dark and quiet because Mark was already asleep. She would shower without turning on the bathroom light, careful not to wake him. She would eat whatever was left in the refrigerator cold, standing over the sink, too tired to use a plate. Then she would set her alarm for 5:30 and she would do it again. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself that was what love looked like in the hard years. Mark started dressing better. She noticed, but she did not say anything. A new jacket appeared in the closet, Italian cut deep charcoal, the kind of fabric that moved differently than anything she owned. She touched the sleeve once in the morning when he was in the shower, and she thought, good. He was rebuilding his confidence. That was what the money was for. She was glad. She folded it carefully and went to work. Then came the networking events. He needed to attend them, he explained. He was building connections. He was positioning himself for a role that matched his experience. The events had dress codes, and the dress codes had costs, and the costs came from the joint account she had opened for them 6 months earlier when she had moved her business savings into it, because he had said quietly and with complete sincerity that building a future together meant building it from one account, not 2. She had agreed. She had thought it was romantic. She had been 29 years old and in love with a man who looked at her like she was the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. She transferred $28,000 into that account. It represented 4 years of work. Every early morning, every burned hand, every event she had catered alone because she could not afford to hire more than one assistant. It was the deposit for the commercial kitchen she had been planning to lease. It was the equipment upgrade she had been budgeting toward for 18 months. It was the safety net she had promised herself she would always keep, no matter what, because she had grown up without one, and she understood in a way that lived in her body rather than her head exactly what it meant to have nothing. She remembered the exact moment she found out it was gone. She had been in this kitchen, a different event, a smaller one, a retirement dinner for a university dean. She had been reducing a beurre blanc between courses when her phone buzzed with a banking notification. She had assumed it was a routine alert. She had wiped her hands on her apron, unlocked the screen, and read the balance. $14.32. She had read it 3 times. She had turned the screen off and turned it back on. She had walked to the walk-in refrigerator and stood inside it for 45 seconds, the cold pressing against her face. Her mind completely flat and white, unable to form a single coherent thought. Then she had walked back to the stove, turned the flame to low, and finished the sauce. She had plated the course. She had served it. She had smiled at the guests and refilled their water glasses and carried the empty plates back to the kitchen and washed them without saying a word to anyone, because she had a contract to finish, because her name was on it, because that was who she was. Mark's explanation had come 3 days later, and it had been smooth practiced and perfectly timed. He had found an investment opportunity, he said, a high-yield account. He had moved the money to protect it, to grow it, to build the future they had talked about. He would show her the paperwork. He would transfer everything back within 60 days plus returns. He had taken her hands in both of his and looked at her with the steady, serious expression of a man who had never once lied to the person in front of him. She had wanted to believe him. She had almost believed him. But the 60 days passed. Then 90. Then the networking event stopped and a different kind of silence replaced them. The silence of a man who had already moved on, who was no longer performing for an audience he no longer needed. He started staying out later. He started answering his phone in the other room. He started sleeping with the ease of someone whose debts were settled, whose accounts were balanced, whose future was already secured. She had begun to understand slowly the way a person understands something they do not want to understand. Now in the heat of this kitchen with the burning sugar filling her lungs and the distant muffled sound of the reception orchestra drifting through the service doors, she understood it completely. She understood it the way the math understood itself. The $4,000 tuxedo on his body had come from her account. The diamond ring on the bride's finger had come from her account. The networking events, the new jacket, the charcoal fabric she had folded carefully in the dark. The confidence she had mistaken for rebuilding all of it had been a transaction, precise, deliberate, and fully funded by her. A news broadcast was playing on a small mounted screen above the prep counter, the sound turned low. A financial anchor was speaking over footage of an aerial view, a sweeping historic estate surrounded by manicured grounds and old-growth trees. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Billionaire CEO pursues landmark acquisition." The anchor's voice, tinny and faint through the small speaker, reported that the CEO had been attempting for months to acquire the estate necessary to finalize a $500 million corporate merger, and that the anonymous current leaseholder had continued to refuse all buyout offers, stalling the deal entirely. Clara did not look at the screen for long. She already knew which estate they were talking about. She already knew who held the lease. She looked down at her phone. The banking app was still open from when she had checked it in the service hallway, force of habit, the way a person checks a wound they already know is there. $14.32. The number sat in the center of the screen, clean and flat and absolute. What Mark had not realized as he had spent her life savings was that Clara's invisible labor had already secured something money could not buy. She closed the app. She put the phone back in her apron pocket. She picked up a clean tray and turned toward the service door. The burning sugar smell followed her all the way to the ballroom. Clara found him in the service hallway. She had not planned it that way. She had simply stepped through the kitchen door to retrieve a fresh linen stack from the supply cart, and there he was. Mark, alone, his back to her, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and intimate in a way she recognized immediately, the voice he used when he wanted someone to feel chosen. She had once been the person he used it on. She stood still. She listened. He said something about the ceremony, about the evening, about how perfectly everything had come together. He laughed once, quiet and satisfied. Then he turned around and he saw her. He ended the call without saying goodbye. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hallway was narrow, concrete walled, lit by a single overhead fixture that cast a flat institutional light over everything. The sound of the ballroom was muffled through the door, a low current of music and conversation and clinking glass, distant and unreachable. In here, the air was cold and close. Clara could smell the catering trays stacked against the far wall. She could smell his cologne. She had bought him that cologne for his birthday 2 years ago with money from a Saturday double shift. She said his name. He straightened. His expression shifted not into guilt, not into shame, but into something harder and more deliberate. The charming, careful mask he wore for the ballroom guests dropped away, and what replaced it was something she had only glimpsed before in the small, unguarded moments she had not known how to read at the time. Now she read it clearly. He was not surprised to see her. He was irritated. "Clara," he said. His tone was flat. Patient the way a person is patient with a problem they expected to manage. "You took my money," she said. She had not planned those words either. She had imagined this conversation many times over the past several weeks, in the early mornings before her shifts, in the walk-in refrigerator, in the shower with the light off. She had constructed careful, precise arguments, organized and controlled. What came out instead was the plain, blunt fact of it, simple and direct, because she was tired, and her knees were still damp from the ballroom floor, and she was done constructing things carefully for him. He glanced at the door. He checked the hallway in both directions. Then he slid his phone into his jacket pocket, and he looked at her, and he smiled. It was not a kind smile. "You need to lower your voice," he said. "There is no one here," she said. "There could be." He tilted his head, unhurried, composed. "Clara, think about what you are doing. Think about where you are right now. You are a caterer at my wedding. Do you understand how this looks?" "I understand exactly how it looks," she said. "Give me my money back." He laughed. It was a short sound. sharp, bright, completely unbothered, and it hit the concrete walls and bounced back at her from every direction, filling the narrow space. She felt it land in her chest, not like a blow, but like a key turning in a lock she had not known was there, opening something cold and quiet and completely clear. He looked her over once slowly, from her damp work shoes to her grease-stained apron to the medical tape on her fingers. His expression was not contemptuous exactly. It was something more precise. It was the expression of a man looking at an object he had already used and set down, assessing with mild, disinterested curiosity why it was still in the room. "You were a stepping stone," he said. "That is all. A stepping stone covered in kitchen grease." He adjusted his cufflink, casual, unhurried. "I needed a foundation. You were available. That is not a crime, Clara. That is just how things work." She said nothing. He took her silence as an opening and pressed forward, his voice dropping into something quieter, more deliberate. "You have two options," he said. "You finish your shift, you collect your catering fee, and you leave quietly. Or you make a scene, and I make sure every venue coordinator, every event planner, and every corporate client in this city knows that Clara's catering causes disruptions at private functions. I have the contacts to do it. You know I do." He checked his Patek Philippe watch, platinum cold in the flat light, with the smooth, unhurried movement of a man for whom time is a resource he has never been short of. "Your business is already barely standing. One phone call ends it." The watch was new. She had not seen it before. She noted the weight of it, the way the light caught the case, the kind of object that did not come from a networking allowance. It came from a specific transaction, one she could trace backward through her own account history if she needed to. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She did not reach for the things she had rehearsed in those early morning hours, the precise, organized arguments, the figures, the dates, the transfer records. She looked at him for a long moment, and she felt her calloused hand move to her apron pocket. Not dramatically, not pointedly, just a small instinctive movement, fingers closing around the edge of the battered leather folder through the fabric. She felt it there, solid, creased, hers. She looked at Mark. She looked at the platinum watch on his wrist. She looked at the pristine $4,000 tuxedo that had never once touched a hot stove or a commercial dish rack or a floor she had to clean on her knees. She took a breath. She released it slowly. "You're right," she said. Her voice was quiet, even completely steady. "I should get back to work." She turned. She walked back toward the kitchen door. Behind her, she heard him exhale the small, satisfied sound of a man who believed he had just closed a negotiation. She heard him reach for his phone again, the screen unlocking with its familiar click. She heard his voice resume its earlier warmth as the call connected, easy and generous and completely at home in itself. She pushed through the kitchen door. Inside, the dessert station still smelled of burning sugar. The dishwasher was running. Two of her junior staff moved between stations with the practiced heads-down focus she had trained them to have. Nobody looked up. Nobody asked questions. She was grateful for that. She walked to the catering station. She opened the drawer. The battered leather folder was exactly where Sarah had placed it, squared against the left side, its grease-stained cover, dark with the history of 100 kitchen shifts. She did not open it. She pressed her palm flat against it for just a moment, the way a person checks that something precious is still where they left it. It was. She closed the drawer. Through the service door, she could hear the Billionaire boss's guests laughing, the warm, practiced laughter of people who had never once stood in a hallway and been told they were a stepping stone. She could hear the distant sound of the microphone being tested at the head table. She could hear the event coordinator confirming with the audio staff that everything was ready for the evening speeches. The Billionaire boss would take the stage soon. She had heard his assistant confirm the timing twice during setup. Clara straightened her apron. She picked up a clean tray. She thought about the folder in the drawer, about the document inside it, ironclad signed and entirely hers. She thought about the news broadcast, the aerial footage, the $500 million merger stalled on a single anonymous lease. She thought about a stepping stone. She almost smiled. If you have ever been used by someone who thought you were too small to fight back, stay with me.
Absolutely not. He just stole her life savings to buy another woman's ring and had the nerve to call her a stepping stone. If that were me, I would have thrown the whole catering cart through those ballroom windows. Imagine pouring years of your blood, sweat, and burned hands into a man, only to have him mock your dirty fingernails. The audacity is truly terrifying.
Clara found him in the service hallway. She had not planned it that way. She had simply stepped through the kitchen door to retrieve a fresh linen stack from the supply cart. And there he was. Mark. Alone. His back to her. His phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and intimate in a way she recognized immediately the voice he used when he wanted someone to feel chosen. She had once been the person he used it on. She stood still. She listened. He said something about the ceremony, about the evening, about how perfectly everything had come together. He laughed once, quiet and satisfied. Then he turned around and he saw her. He ended the call without saying goodbye. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hallway was narrow, concrete-walled, lit by a single overhead fixture that cast a flat, institutional light over everything. The sound of the ballroom was muffled through the door, a low current of music and conversation, and clinking glass distant and unreachable. In here, the air was cold and close. Clara could smell the catering trays stacked against the far wall. She could smell his cologne. She had bought him that cologne for his birthday 2 years ago with money from a Saturday double shift. She said his name. He straightened. His expression shifted not into guilt, not into shame, but into something harder and more deliberate. The charming, careful mask he wore for the ballroom guests dropped away, and what replaced it was something she had only glimpsed before in the small, unguarded moments she had not known how to read at the time. Now she read it clearly. He was not surprised to see her. He was irritated. "Clara," he said. His tone was flat, patient, the way a person is patient with a problem they expected to manage. "You took my money," she said. She had not planned those words either. She had imagined this conversation many times over the past several weeks in the early mornings before her shifts in the walk-in refrigerator in the shower with the light off. She had constructed careful, precise arguments, organized and controlled. What came out instead was the plain, blunt fact of it, simple and direct because she was tired, and her knees were still damp from the ballroom floor, and she was done constructing things carefully for him. He glanced at the door. He checked the hallway in both directions. Then he slid his phone into his jacket pocket, and he looked at her and he smiled. It was not a kind smile. "You need to lower your voice," he said. "There is no one here," she said. "There could be." He tilted his head, unhurried, composed. "Clara, think about what you are doing. Think about where you are right now. You are a caterer at my wedding. Do you understand how this looks?" "I understand exactly how it looks," she said. "Give me my money back." He laughed. It was a short sound. Sharp, bright, completely unbothered, and it hit the concrete walls and bounced back at her from every direction, filling the narrow space. She felt it land in her chest, not like a blow, but like a key turning in a lock she had not known was there, opening something cold and quiet and completely clear. He looked her over once slowly, from her damp work shoes to her grease-stained apron to the medical tape on her fingers. His expression was not contemptuous exactly. It was something more precise. It was the expression of a man looking at an object he had already used and set down, assessing with mild disinterested curiosity why it was still in the room. "You were a stepping stone," he said. "That is all. A stepping stone covered in kitchen grease." He adjusted his cufflink casual, unhurried. "I needed a foundation. You were available. That is not a crime, Clara. That is just how things work." She said nothing. He took her silence as an opening and pressed forward, his voice dropping into something quieter, more deliberate. "You have two options," he said. "You finish your shift, you collect your catering fee, and you leave quietly. Or you make a scene and I make sure every venue coordinator, every event planner, and every corporate client in this city knows that Clara's catering causes disruptions at private functions. I have the contacts to do it. You know I do." He checked his Patek Philippe watch, platinum cold in the flat light, with the smooth, unhurried movement of a man for whom time is a resource he has never been short of. Your business is already barely standing. One phone call ends it. The watch was new. She had not seen it before. She noted the weight of it, the way the light caught the case, the kind of object that did not come from a networking allowance. It came from a specific transaction, one she could trace backward through her own account history if she needed to. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She did not reach for the things she had rehearsed in those early morning hours. The precise, organized arguments, the figures, the dates, the transfer records. She looked at him for a long moment, and she felt her calloused hand move to her apron pocket. Not dramatically, not pointedly, just a small, instinctive movement. Fingers closing around the edge of the battered leather folder through the fabric. She felt it there, solid, creased, hers. She looked at Mark. She looked at the platinum watch on his wrist. She looked at the pristine $4,000 tuxedo that had never once touched a hot stove or a commercial dish rack or a floor she had to clean on her knees. She took a breath. She released it slowly. "You're right," she said. Her voice was quiet, even completely steady. "I should get back to work." She turned. She walked back toward the kitchen door. Behind her, she heard him exhale the small, satisfied sound of a man who believed he had just closed a negotiation. She heard him reach for his phone again, the screen unlocking with its familiar click. She heard his voice resume its earlier warmth as the call connected, easy and generous and completely at home in itself. She pushed through the kitchen door. Inside, the dessert station still smelled of burning sugar. The dishwasher was running. Two of her junior staff moved between stations with the practiced heads-down focus she had trained them to have. Nobody looked up. Nobody asked questions. She was grateful for that. She walked to the catering station. She opened the drawer. The battered leather folder was exactly where Sarah had placed it, squared against the left side. Its grease-stained cover dark with the history of 100 kitchen shifts. She did not open it. She pressed her palm flat against it for just a moment, the way a person checks that something precious is still where they left it. It was. She closed the drawer. Through the service doors, she could hear the billionaire boss's guests laughing. The warm, practiced laughter of people who had never once stood in a hallway and been told they were a stepping stone. She could hear the distant sound of the microphone being tested at the head table. She could hear the event coordinator confirming with the audio staff that everything was ready for the evening speeches. The billionaire boss would take the stage soon. She had heard his assistant confirm the timing twice during setup. Clara straightened her apron. She picked up a clean tray. She thought about the folder in the drawer, about the document inside it, ironclad signed, and entirely hers. She thought about the news broadcast, the aerial footage, the $500 million merger stalled on a single anonymous lease. She thought about a stepping stone. She almost smiled. If you have ever been used by someone who thought you were too small to fight back, stay with me. Clara sat on the milk crate. It was plastic, cracked along one side, overturned beside the industrial dishwasher, and it was the only seat available in the dish pit. She had been assigned here 40 minutes ago. Mark had complained to the wedding planner. The wedding planner had found the catering supervisor. The catering supervisor had found Clara apologetic and careful, and told her without quite meeting her eyes that it would be better for everyone if she stayed in the back for the remainder of the evening. Clara had nodded. She had picked up her tray. She had walked to the dish pit without a word. She sat now, and she let herself be still. The industrial dishwasher ran its cycle beside her, a deep mechanical shudder that she felt in her sternum more than heard. The steam came out in regular, punishing bursts, hot and chemical-scented, carrying the smell of industrial detergent and old food and something faintly metallic underneath it all. Every time the cycle released, the steam hit her face in a wave, damp and scalding, and she let it. She did not move back. She did not turn away. She sat with her elbows on her knees and her burned hands loose between them, and she let the heat press against her skin because at least it was something she could feel clearly. The fluorescent light above her flickered. Once. twice. Then steadied buzzing at a frequency that lived just at the edge of perception, a thin, persistent sound that she had stopped noticing after the first 10 minutes and then started noticing again after the second 10. It mixed with the muffled current of the ballroom drifting through the service doors, the low orchestral swell, the careful, wealthy laughter, the clean sound of crystal against crystal. Two worlds separated by a single door and a concrete wall, and she was on the wrong side of both of them. She had ironed his shirts. The thought arrived plainly without drama, the way the most devastating things often do. She had ironed his shirts. She had pressed the collars carefully the way he liked, flat and crisp, and she had hung them in the closet in order of color because he had mentioned once casually that it helped him in the mornings. She had paid his gym membership for 11 months because he said it helped his confidence during the job search. She had covered the rent alone for 6 months, then 8, then quietly stopped counting. She had burned her hands over commercial stoves and carried trays through rooms full of people who looked through her and deposited every dollar she earned into an account that now held $14.32. And her reward was a dirty floor. She pressed her thumbs together. She looked at the cracked plastic crate beneath her. She thought about the milk crate specifically, the way it was the kind of object that existed entirely for function, entirely for use, entirely to hold something else up, and was then overturned and sat on in the steam of a dish pit by a woman in damp work shoes, while on the other side of the wall, a man in a $4,000 tuxedo stood at a golden microphone and received a toast. Through the doors, she heard the billionaire boss's voice rise above the orchestral fade. The microphone carried it cleanly even through the concrete. His voice was the kind of voice that had never needed to ask for quiet. Rooms simply gave it. He was speaking about his new son-in-law. He was speaking about character. He used the word integrity. He used it twice, warm and deliberate, the second time to a fresh wave of applause. And the applause moved through the door and down the hallway, and found Clara in the dish pit, and settled over her like something heavy. She almost broke. It was not a dramatic almost. It was not the kind of almost that announces itself. It was simply a moment, quiet and specific, in which everything she had been holding, flat and still inside her chest, shifted fractionally the way a foundation shifts, invisible on the surface, but fundamental underneath. And she felt the edges of it, the 4 years, the shirts, the burned hands, the $14, the floor, the crate, the steam, the applause. The word integrity spoken over a man who had emptied her account to buy another woman's future. She felt her eyes go hot. She did not cry. She pressed her thumbs harder together. She breathed through it once, twice, slow and deliberate, the way she had breathed through the service hallway and the ballroom floor, and every other moment in this long, particular day that had required her to stay inside herself. The dishwasher shuddered through another cycle. The steam hit her face. The fluorescent light buzzed. The applause from the ballroom faded into music, something slow and romantic, the kind of song chosen for a first dance. Clara looked at the service door. Then she reached up and she untied her apron. She folded it once, neatly by habit, and set it across her knees. She sat for a moment with it there, the worn cotton warm from her body, the grease stains in their familiar places, the pockets she knew by feel without looking. She had worn aprons like this for 12 years. She had started in a breakfast diner at 19, working doubles on weekends, saving in cash because she did not yet have a bank account. She had worked every station in every kind of kitchen that would have her. She had built something, slowly, carefully, with her hands and her hours and her stubborn private refusal to stop. She reached into the apron pocket. She took out the battered leather folder. She held it in her lap for a moment, her burned hands resting on the cover. The leather was dark with age and use, creased along the spine, one corner worn soft from years of handling. It did not look like leverage. It did not look like anything. It looked like something a tired woman had carried through too many kitchens, which was exactly what it was. She opened it. Inside the document was crisp and clean, protected in a clear sleeve she had inserted 3 months ago when she understood finally what she actually held. The letterhead was the estate's legal firm. The language was precise, formal, and entirely unambiguous. Her name appeared on the signature line, Clara Renee Aldridge, in her own handwriting beside the notary stamp and the date. The terms were ironclad. 10 years, exclusive, non-transferable, with a renewal option she had quietly negotiated into the contract 2 years ago, during a moment of careful foresight she had not fully understood at the time. She read the first paragraph. She did not need to. She had memorized it. She read it anyway. She was the anonymous leaseholder. She had been for 2 years. The historic estate, the grand ballroom, the manicured grounds, the old-growth trees the news broadcast had shown in aerial footage, all of it operated under her lease. Every event held here, including this wedding, including this reception, including the golden microphone the billionaire boss was currently speaking into, existed on her terms, in her building, on her contract. The billionaire boss needed this estate, specifically, irreplaceably. His $500 million merger required it, and he had been trying to reach the anonymous leaseholder for months, and every offer had gone unanswered because Clara had not been ready. She had been building toward ready. She had been carrying the folder and waiting for the moment that made the most sense, the moment with the most people in the room, the moment from which there was no quiet reversal, no managed retreat, no phone call to a venue coordinator that made the problem disappear. She had found her moment. The first dance music drifted through the door, soft and swelling, the kind of song written for a room full of people who believed the best part of the story was beginning. Clara closed the folder. She smoothed her apron. She pressed the folder against her chest for a moment, one hand flat over it, feeling the edges of it solid and real and entirely hers. Then she stood up. She tucked the folder under her arm. She retied her apron carefully, the strings crossed and knotted at the front, the way she always did, them neat and practical and completely her own. She looked at the cracked plastic milk crate for a moment, at the small, damp impression her weight had left in it. She looked at the service door. She walked toward it. Clara wiped her tears, smoothed her stained apron, and carried the folder toward the ballroom doors. The ballroom doors opened. Clara did not push them dramatically. She did not throw them wide or enter at a run or announce herself in any way. She simply placed her palm flat against the left door and pushed steadily, and the door swung inward and she walked through it. The folder was tucked under her left arm. Her apron was tied. Her shoes were still damp. She walked the way she had walked into every room of every event she had ever worked. Head-level pace measured purpose in her body, but nothing visible on her face. 300 guests did not notice her immediately. The billionaire boss was still at the microphone. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of physical authority that came not from size alone, but from decades of being the person in every room who decided what happened next. His voice filled the ballroom cleanly, no effort required. He was mid-sentence, something about legacy, about what a man's choices revealed about his character. The word character. Clara noted it. She kept walking. She moved through the outer edge of the room, first along the perimeter, passing behind the seated guests, her path curving in a long arc toward the head table. A woman in a sapphire gown half turned as Clara passed, then looked away. A white-haired man in a charcoal suit frowned briefly at the folder under her arm and returned to his champagne. Clara did not look at them. She looked at the head table. She looked at Mark. He saw her at the same moment she reached the inner aisle. She watched his face move through its changes. First a flicker of confusion, the automatic processing of a familiar face in an unexpected context. Then recognition. Then something sharper and colder than either, the precise, panicked calculation of a man who has just understood that a variable he believed he had removed from the equation has not in fact been removed. He leaned toward the wedding planner, seated 2 chairs to his left. Clara saw his mouth move. She saw the wedding planner's head turn. She kept walking. She was 12 feet from the head table. Then 10, then 8. Mark stood up. He did not shout. He was too controlled for that, too practiced. He rose from his chair and he smiled, the broad, gracious smile of a groom managing a small disruption with generous good humor, and he said clearly enough for the nearest tables to hear, "Security, please. We have a confused staff member who needs to be escorted out." 2 security guards moved from the perimeter. They were large, professional, and fast. Clara did not stop. She did not slow down. She walked directly toward the head table, and she was aware of the guards closing the distance behind her, and she was aware of the billionaire boss pausing mid-sentence at the microphone, and she was aware of the bride's face turning toward her with an expression of delicate, practiced alarm. Clara reached the head table. She placed the folder on the imported white linen. She did not slam it. She set it down with one hand flat and deliberate, the grease-stained leather cover dark against the pristine cloth. The sound it made was small, a single quiet impact. It was enough. The billionaire boss stopped speaking. The room was not yet silent. It was moving toward silence the way a large body of water moves the surface, still carrying the impression of the last motion, while the current underneath had already changed direction. Conversations dropped in irregular intervals. The orchestra had stopped when the boss stopped. 300 people were doing the particular collective thing that crowds do when they sense that something real is happening, drawing breath, going still, turning toward the center. Mark's voice came from behind her, tighter now, the gracious performance strained at its edges. "Get her out," he said. "Now. Get her out." The guards reached her. One of them closed a hand around her arm, firm and certain. Clara did not move. She looked at the billionaire boss. He was looking at the folder. "Open it," she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The room had reached its silence, complete and absolute. 300 people, and one orchestra, and one golden microphone, all holding the same suspended breath. Her voice moved through it without effort. The billionaire boss looked at her. His expression was the expression of a man who had not been surprised in a long time and was recalibrating rapidly with the specific focused attention of someone who had survived decades in rooms exactly like this one by understanding faster than everyone else what was actually happening. He looked at the folder. He looked at Clara. He reached out and he opened it. The silence in the room changed quality. It had been the silence of anticipation. It became the silence of understanding. The billionaire boss read the first paragraph. He read the second. His face did not move. His hand flat on the table beside the document was completely still. He read for 45 seconds without looking up, and in those 45 seconds, something fundamental shifted in the room, invisible and irreversible, the way Clara's foundation had shifted in the dish pit, but in the opposite direction. He looked up. He looked at Mark. Mark had gone the particular precise color of a man whose blood has redirected itself to the center of his body, leaving the surface pale and cold and very still. He was standing beside his chair with his hands at his sides, and the smile was entirely gone, and what was underneath it was something Clara had never seen on his face before. Not the irritation from the hallway, not the cold calculation, something smaller and more fundamental. Something that looked in the flat light of 300 witnesses, like the first moment of genuine fear. "This is the estate lease," the billionaire boss said. He was not asking. His voice was quiet, and it was the specific quiet of a man who had just finished a very rapid calculation and arrived at a number he did not like. "Yes," Clara said. "You are the anonymous leaseholder." "Yes." He looked at the document again. He looked at her name on the signature line. He looked at the notary stamp. He closed the folder. He set his hand flat on top of it, and he was silent for a moment, and in that moment the entire room waited. "How long?" he said. 2 years, she said. "The renewal option extends it to 10. He nodded once. A small, precise movement, the nod of a man filing information rather than responding to it. He turned to look at his daughter. The bride was seated very straight, very still, her diamond catching the chandelier light in small, cold flashes. She was looking at her father with an expression Clara could not fully read from where she stood, something between confusion and the first dawning awareness that the room had changed around her in a way that had not yet been explained. The billionaire boss turned back to Clara. "What do you want?" he said. The security guard's hand was still on Clara's arm. She looked at it once. The guard looked at the boss. The boss made a small, sideward motion with 2 fingers. The hand released. Clara stood straight. She looked at the billionaire boss across the white linen and the grease-stained folder and the ruin of a wedding reception, and she said quietly and without performance exactly what she had come to say. "He stole $28,000 from me," she said. "My savings, my business, 4 years of work." She did not gesture toward Mark. She did not need to. Every person in the room already knew who she meant. "I want it back. Every cent in front of every person in this room, and I want him gone from every room that matters to him the way he made sure I was gone from every room that mattered to me." The ballroom held its silence. Sarah stood at the far doorway, a silver tray in both hands, perfectly still watching. Her eyes were on Clara. Her expression was the expression of a woman who had watched someone be put on their knees and was now watching them rise, and who understood, with the complete clarity of a witness, exactly what the distance between those two moments had cost. The billionaire boss looked at his new son-in-law for a long moment. Mark did not speak. He had run out of the particular currency that had served him in every previous room, the charm, the calculation, the carefully constructed surfaces, and he stood now without any of it in his $4,000 tuxedo in a room of 300 people on a floor he did not own. Mark thought he had won the game. He did not realize the invisible caterer owned the entire board. The billionaire boss did not hesitate. That was the thing Clara would remember most clearly afterward in the quiet weeks that followed. Not the applause, not the wire transfer notification, not the sound of Mark's voice when it finally broke. What she would remember most was the absence of hesitation. The boss turned from the document to his attorney, a thin man in a dark suit seated 3 chairs down the head table, and he said 2 words low and direct, and the attorney opened his briefcase without a question. He turned to his corporate security lead, a woman stationed near the ballroom's east entrance, and he said 4 words, and the woman moved immediately, signaling the 2 guards at the perimeter. He did all of this in under 30 seconds with the flat economical precision of a man who had spent 40 years making large decisions in rooms full of people and had learned that the quality of a decision lived entirely in its execution, not its announcement. Then he turned to Mark. The room was still holding its silence. 300 guests, the orchestra, the wedding planner frozen at her station with a clipboard pressed to her chest, the bride seated and motionless at the center of the head table, all of them suspended in the particular stillness of people witnessing something they understood was real and irreversible and not meant for them to interrupt. Mark had not sat back down. He was still standing beside his chair, his hands at his sides, his face the pale, stripped color of a man who had watched his architecture disassemble in real time and had not yet decided what expression to replace it with. He looked at his father-in-law. He opened his mouth. The billionaire boss spoke first. "The shares," he said, "all of them. Transfer them back to the parent company. Tonight." Mark's mouth stayed open for a moment, then it closed. His jaw tightened. "You can't," he said. His voice was low, controlled still, but only just the control of a man gripping something that was actively slipping. "Those shares were a wedding gift. They were formalized this morning. You cannot reverse a formalized transfer without my consent." "I can," the boss said. He said it the way a person states a physical fact, the way a person says the floor is concrete or the ceiling is high. "Read your prenuptial agreement, Clause 14. Any corporate asset transferred within the calendar year of marriage is subject to immediate recall upon the dissolution of the marriage at the discretion of the transferring party." He paused. "I am exercising that discretion. I am..." The silence in the room shifted. It became something denser and more specific, the silence of 300 people processing the word dissolution. The bride's face changed. It changed the way a face changes when a thing it has been told is solid reveals itself as temporary, not with drama, not with collapse, but with a small, precise alteration around the eyes and mouth, a recalibration of what the immediate future was going to require. She looked at her father. Her father did not look at her. He was looking at Mark with the flat, assessing attention of a man who was no longer seeing a son-in-law. "The marriage," the boss said, "is nullified." A sound moved through the room. Not a gasp, not a murmur, something more specific than either the collective involuntary release of 300 people who had been holding the same breath. Mark's composure fractured. It did not shatter. He was too practiced for that. But the fracture was visible, a tightening through his shoulders, a shift in his jaw, a rapid, involuntary blink. He looked at Clara. It was the first time he had looked at her directly since she had walked through the ballroom doors, and his expression in that moment was not the annoyance from the ballroom floor or the cold calculation from the service hallway. It was something more complicated, something that lived between disbelief and a furious, desperate need to find one remaining lever, one remaining door, one remaining surface he could still operate from. He found it, or he believed he had. "She has nothing," he said. The words came out fast-pressured, aimed at the room as much as at the boss. "A catering contract, a lease on a building she cannot afford to maintain. She is standing in a $15 apron, making threats she cannot back up. You are dissolving your daughter's marriage over a grease-stained folder from a kitchen worker." His voice climbed fractionally, and he caught it and brought it back down and pressed forward. "Think about what you are doing. Think about what this looks like." The boss looked at him for a long moment. "Give her back her money," he said. The simplicity of it landed in the room like the folder had landed on the table. Flat, quiet, final. Mark's attorney, seated at a table near the east wall, rose and took one step forward. The boss's corporate security lead turned toward him, and the attorney sat back down. Mark looked at his attorney. He looked at the boss. He looked at the two guards who had moved to positions on either side of him during the past 2 minutes with the quiet, unhurried certainty of people who were not going to be argued with. He reached into his jacket. He took out his phone. His hands, Clara noticed, were not entirely steady. The phone screen lit his face from below as he opened the banking application, and she watched his jaw work as he navigated to the transfer screen, and she thought about him in their apartment in the early mornings, kissing her forehead, and she felt the thought arrive, and she let it move through her, and she did not look away. He typed in the amount, $28,000. She watched his thumb pause over the confirmation. The room watched with her. He pressed confirm. The notification arrived on Clara's phone in the suspended silence of the ballroom, a single clean ping that carried through 300 people and one orchestra and the high-ceilinged grandeur of the historic estate with the unambiguous clarity of a sentence ending. She did not reach for the phone immediately. She looked at the screen where it sat in her apron pocket, the notification visible through the thin fabric, the glow of it warm and steady against her hip. She reached down. She took the phone out. She looked at the balance. $28,014. 32 cents. She held the phone for a moment. She looked at the number. She thought about the walk-in refrigerator, the screen turned off and back on the white, flat silence of understanding something she had not wanted to understand. She thought about the milk crate and the fluorescent light and the steam and the word integrity spoken over a man at a golden microphone. She thought about the medical tape pink and soaked through and the crunch of crystal under her knees on the marble floor. She put the phone back in her pocket. The guards moved. They took Mark by the arms, one on each side efficiently and without roughness, the way professionals handle a situation that has already been decided. Mark did not fight them. He looked for a moment like a man who had forgotten how. His $4,000 tuxedo bunched at the shoulders where their hands gripped it, the pristine fabric pulling out of its careful line, and he was walked forward, away from the head table, away from the bride, away from the golden microphone and the crystal chandeliers, and the imported white linen and everything he had built on a foundation he had stolen from a woman in a $15 apron. They walked him toward the service hallway, the same narrow concrete corridor where he had laughed at her grease-stained apron and checked his platinum watch and told her she was a stepping stone. The guards pushed through the service door. The door swung shut behind them. The sound of his footsteps faded down the concrete, and then the outer door opened, and there was a brief, distant sound of rain, and then the outer door closed, and there was nothing. Clara stood at the head table. The room was very quiet. Then, from somewhere near the back, a single person began to clap. It was not dramatic, not building slowly into a crescendo the way applause builds in films. It was simply one person, and then two, and then the sound moved through the room in its own time, unforced, and Clara stood in it and did not perform anything. She was tired, her knees hurt, her hands were burned. She was $28,000 less poor than she had been 3 minutes ago. And she was standing in the grand ballroom of the historic estate on her lease in her apron and her $15 shoes, and she was completely, entirely herself. Sarah appeared at her elbow. She had crossed the ballroom from the doorway, silver tray in both hands, and she stopped beside Clara and stood there, straight-backed and steady. And she looked out at the room the same way Clara was looking at it, with the particular quiet satisfaction of a witness who had seen the whole story and had held the evidence and had waited in exactly the right place for the ending to arrive. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Clara looked at her. She looked at the silver tray. She looked at the ballroom, the chandeliers, the white tables, the 300 people, the bride who was being attended to by 2 women in silk at the far end of the head table, the attorney packing his briefcase, the orchestra beginning cautiously to tune. She reached out. She lifted one champagne glass from Sarah's tray. She held it for a moment. "You're right, Mark," she said quietly, to the closed service door, to the empty chair, to the rain outside and the concrete hallway and the whole long architecture of 4 years. "I am a stepping stone." She paused. "And you just slipped." She set the glass back on the tray. She straightened her apron. She picked up the grease-stained folder from the head table and tucked it back under her arm. She looked at Sarah once more, and Sarah looked back at her. And something passed between them that did not require words, the specific, complete understanding of 2 women who had spent their lives being invisible in rooms like this one and knew, with the full weight of that knowledge, exactly what it meant to finally be seen. Clara turned. She walked back through the ballroom the way she had entered it, past the white tables, past the crystal and the ivory roses and the cascading chandeliers, past the guests who watched her go and the ones who had already turned back to their conversations, past the space where the orchestra was beginning to find its opening notes, again cautious and warm, filling the room with something that sounded almost like a beginning. She pushed through the service door. The concrete hallway was empty. The outer door was still closed. She could hear the rain on the other side of it, steady and quiet, the sound of something that had been falling long before any of this and would continue long after. She stood in the hallway for a moment. She breathed. Then she went back to work. That overwhelming sense of righteous vindication you're feeling right now is exactly what happens when silent endurance finally meets absolute poetic justice. If you were in Clara's shoes, staring down at the man who stole your life savings to marry someone else, would you have just demanded your money back, or would you have demanded he lose his entire empire? Drop your verdict in the comments below and subscribe to the Storytelling Empire for more stories where karma always collects its debts.